So I'll read the last chapter, which is The Blood of This Rose, which is named after the Kathiaka track, which is just an amazing album. And very bodily. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the big shifts, right, is that I've tried to go into like having a somatic practice, like a bodily form of practice. So the first quote is from this like very popular book, The Body Keeps the Score, and it only occurred to me like fairly late on in this project that it fits pretty well with the title. Those soldiers who had been traumatized and subsequently developed PTSD did not modify their accounts. Their memories were preserved essentially intact 45 years after the war ended. Whether we remember a particular event at all and how accurate our memories of it are largely depends on how personally meaningful it was and how emotional we felt about it at the time. And then that's kind of complemented with this Sarah Kendzior quote from 2016. Write your biography, write down your memories. Because if you do not do it now, you may forget. Write a list of things you would never do, because it is possible that in the next year you will do them. Write a list of things you would never believe, because it is possible that in the next year you will either believe them or be forced to say you believe them. In Germany, where I reside, the culture of genocide remembrance has failed at this time to acknowledge the long pattern of such crimes against humanity inflicted by human beings upon ourselves, as we see today in Gaza. And given the recent resurgence of far-right political slogans, only 3 generations after the Holocaust, it seems that memory culture did not exactly emerge from deep within the German national soul in any case. Let me be clear here. Comparison is not correlation. Events do not lose their specificity when one horror is discussed in the context of another. On the contrary, this is the bedrock of a scientific method that allows us to make sense and produce new knowledge. The Holocaust, detached and singularized as the dominant culture in Germany wishes it, creates a situation whereby acknowledgement of the trauma inherent to the memory of genocide is surrendered to a process of national branding, with accuracy as the price tag. Speaking as a German citizen, what we need in Germany is not a memory culture that allows us to forget, but rather traumatic memory culture. And the sooner people realize this, the sooner work can begin on the next phase of healing. If, in parallel, the point of political work is to connect real experiences with appropriate demands, a culture that remembers should also be a culture that endures. Each ritual of remembrance should connect an awareness of the system to an aspiration to continue changing that system for the better, to processing the traumas of the past, which means accessing emotion in a way as a way to access sorrow rather than anger and rage. The question of which planned exterminations are remembered therefore strikes at the heart of our strength or weakness as a species. Now, clearly, the volume of data I encounter as a human being versus the apparatus I have to process it are wildly unmatched. The brain is a virtual reality machine, and not a very good one. Humans run from suffering into more suffering with shocking consistency. To doubt is a great human strength. But in a world in which simply having precise memories has become countercultural, I fear that yesterday's trauma is being instrumentalized to re-traumatize the present. As the late Professor Yehuda Bauer stated, the horror of the Holocaust is not that it deviated from human norms. The horror is that it didn't. what the censorship of anyone, including cultural workers, speaking out against Germany's complicity in the genocide of Palestinians, has once again revealed is that the museum is a militarized battleground. Artworks are sites of conflict, and all art is indeed political. To speak of the dominant culture in Germany is also to speak of white supremacy, surveillance capitalism and queer-phobic patriarchy globally. It is also to speak of incredibly insecure, mostly white, mostly cis men. It is, in my opinion, to speak of ideologically and spiritually undernourished individuals that have been programmed or seek to program users with memory politics. A comparison that highlights how deeply militarization is embedded in the dominant culture of Germany are the commissioned sacred date palm trees at the site of the Secret Service Building, or BND, in Berlin. A 12,000-year-old culture extracted from Syria and Iran to evoke a cheerful illusionism that releases thoughts of holidays, beaches, and sun. According to Martin Siegel discussing Ulrich Brüchge's Null-Bright Modified Cell Towers, 2012, found at the rear of the largest urban Secret Service building in the world, Berlin, Germany. A foreshadowing of the plans to transform the children under the rubble of Gaza into a holiday resort. That is what I feel I'm up against. The technology of power in the form of surveillance capitalism assaults my psychic interior. And when I interrogate one of its sites of power, I'm faced with sacred symbols from a part of the world that has been turned into a permanent war zone in my name. And as soon as I try to defend the resistance struggles there, colonial laws against homosexuality that are still in place today in countries such as Palestine are misused in an effort to point out contradictions in my argument. The flagrant hypocrisy of a deeply colonial logic that attempts to separate us out into selves and others. Let me think again with the body. The signals that tell me to flee, fight, or freeze are communicated by the vagus nerve system that runs throughout the essential organs of my body. They send sensory information to my core cerebral brain across transmitters and receivers at the site of the lower brain stem towards top of my spine. Now, because interpretation is an anatomical function of the mechanisms that process such sensory information en route to the thinking brain, by definition, more than one interpretation will be possible. Curiosity and suspicion are very similar thought forms that both begin as gut instincts, for example. I then have to decide which feeling is most prevalent before offering trust or skepticism. Seeds of doubt and mistrust may creep in. Reasoning is about reducing the number of unpredictable outcomes. If I stand to benefit from an action, my reasoning may become swayed, my objectivity blurred. Ideally, at this moment, my gut instinct or my ethical compass become activated, and a bad decision can be avoided. But a racing mind that has been triggered by a threat or reward will have to work harder, dedicating more and more valuable energy, sifting through memories, to arrive at a rational conclusion. I would argue that this is one of the mechanisms through which oppression reproduces the conditions necessary for the oppressor's survival. The logic of the oppressor to divide and rule arguably benefits from this potential slippage between the vagus nerve or gut brain and the thinking, calculating higher brain. Because of the lag between what we feel and what we know in our minds to be true, it has arguably been possible throughout history to trick people into agreeing to commit stupid, mindlessly violent acts upon an other who they have come to intuitively, even culturally fear. And so this oppressive, inherently colonial logic relies on the basic trauma of being a human being, a day-to-day anxiety born of the anatomical gap described above, dividing and ruling as much from the monopolization of material wealth, social and political manipulation, as from the internal, embodied miscommunication at the root of humanness. However, bodies in commune prevent the isolated from being radicalized into violence, which in turn prevents the centralization of ever-escalating new forms of violence within society. Because that is how fear-mongering fascism works. That's the battle is in your mind first authoritarianism. Just ask Hannah Arendt, she knew. Ask Nora Erekat. Or ask Joanna Macy how to interpret her work of the Great Turning. Ask those informed by Buddhism about turning to face environmental and social collapse. As I interpret her work in my own divergent way, and specifically in Germany, this great turning must also be about facing the past in a new light. It's not about creating a cult around the sacred date palm trees, flushed into the sky like two towering toilet brushes, or the skulls in the basements of museums. It's about facing the trauma that put those objects there in the first place, enacting the trauma to treat its virus like a nerve tonic, stimulating the recovery process. Earth's rebirth trauma will not be pretty. Trauma awareness is therefore included in the formulation of my demands. And that means an awareness of the trauma that white bodies have inflicted, first upon white Europeans, and later upon those peoples that whites have othered, invaded, colonized, enslaved, culturally appropriated, and surveyed, and which never seems to make white people happy anyway. And I can thank Resmaa Menakem's work, My Grandmother's Hands, for those insights also. But it's not enough to be trauma aware, though it is an essential starting point. I need an awareness of how trauma is embodied in order to offer a path forwards. Given the insights around the accuracy of traumatic memory above, I have called for a traumatic memory culture to replace Germany's floundering memory culture. Yet, would that fill the spiritual void that haunts a species who cannot seem to progress from nation-founding genocides? No, it would only allow us to dwell further in the past, deeper within the self, tied all the more strongly to owning our traumas. The work begins with trauma awareness, but cannot end there. Traumatic memory culture is the knot in my spine, and now that must be undone through spiritual, physical, and mental exercise, through doing the work. Only by returning to the human body may I unlock the systematic tensions that prevent me from walking forward. Everywhere, voices tell us that we are heading for dark times ahead, as though the dream would therefore be to exist in the blinding strip lighting of inside the German Secret Service building, or the blinding light of the Russian Orthodox Church, or the hills of California as they burn. White fantasies of control in this American life. Yet it is light, rather than whiteness, that must be cast upon each situation as it really is. White skin has encouraged and nurtured a savage global fantasy of endless economic growth. White skin perpetuates a politicized rendering of lightness and a weaponized fear of shadows. My own white skin types these words, and in this book it has been the privilege of this white body that has spoken, questioned, and attempted to face itself. In addition, I would therefore like to conclude with a few words on the subject from a different perspective. To borrow from poet Hillel Chulman's Phosphorus Bread, Coffee, 2009, referred to by Professor Mohammed Nahle, speaking at the Diane Lewis Student Lecture Series in 2024. I discovered that my skin is not white. I became certain of this when I saw the white spots of phosphorus trickle through my skin. The fire reached my bones. Whiteness consumed me. What have I learned from the resilience of black bodies to the genocidal trend of whiteness? The humans use experiences of their own bodies to gain access to more emancipated versions of themselves. This begins at the microscopic level with intention, presence, and clarity. It works up to the collectively acting body. Bodies are not that which separate us. On the contrary, our bodies are that which we share in common. The future belongs to crowds. Thank you for being here.